Ben Waldie, the world's expert on Automator. Can you tell them a little bit about yourself?
Yep. So my name is Ben Waldie, and I run a company called Automated Workflows. Most of what I do is like custom software development for people, and I help people improve their workflows and automate processes and just become more efficient. But you might have also seen some of my articles. I write a lot of times for Macworld, MacTech magazine. I've written a lot of content for PeachPit. Actually, the Automator Visual Quick Start Guide for PeachPit came out a little while ago. That was written for Snow Leopard, and it hasn't really been updated since then because not a whole lot has changed with Automator since then. But anyway, so that's a little bit about me. I live in Pennsylvania. I have 3 daughters, ages 1, 11, or 12, she just turned 12, and 17. And it is very, very cold here right now, so.
What's the temperature?
I'm going to say it's at least in the 20s. It's pretty cold.
Well, we were cold this morning.
Yeah, we were cold this morning. It was probably, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Turn your phone's off.
Hold on a second, I got to turn my phone on.
It was 51 supposedly overnight then.
Yeah, it was 51 this morning.
Okay. Yeah, I had to walk my daughter to the bus stop this morning, and I'm betting it was probably in the low 20s, so it was pretty cold.
You have much snow?
Not a whole lot, but we've had, it's turned to ice, so it's been slippery.
So that's kind of hairy when it gets like that. All right, so let's go. Let's start.
All right.
We have a nice crowd here this morning.
Okay.
Probably around 80. No, we do have a nice crowd.
Okay.
And we really appreciate you joining
Talking about
us.
the average age.
Yeah, 80 was the average age. We're kind of old folks here.
Speak for yourself.
We actually are becoming a blue zone, which is, I guess, an area where they believe they can keep everybody alive until at least 100. So we're making pretty good progress. Ruth's not with us. We have a 95-year-old who's usually with us, but she doesn't seem to be here this morning.
Okay. So I already kind of introduced myself, so I'm going to skip all that. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about Mac OS X automation. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can automate things in OS X. And first thing I just want to mention is that a lot of the applications that you guys use on a regular basis have built-in automation features. So if you guys use Photoshop or Illustrator or some of the Adobe applications, they have features that are built in called actions that allow you to record and then play them back part of the flow. Other applications like iPhoto and Mail have built-in automation features. iPhoto, for example, can export like a whole album of images, and it can resize them as it does it and rename them and things like that. And then Mail has the ability to trigger rules when emails come in and sort them into different folders or perform other actions. So there's a lot of different things you can do with your built-in applications without even getting into Automator or any kind of custom automation. Now today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the OS level automation technologies. So there's 3 main automation technologies in OS X. One is AppleScript, one is Automator, and one is services. And I'm going to touch briefly on all of these, but I'm going to focus mainly on Automator and services, which has to do with Automator. What time do you guys need me to stop, just so I know?
Probably 45 minutes.
Hello? Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Did you hear me? I said 45 minutes.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm not going over because we started a little late. Okay. All right, so first off, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the benefits of automation. So why would somebody want to automate something? Well, there's lots of reasons, and the same reasons that you would see when you do automation not on your computer. But first of all, when you automate something on your Mac, it's going to perform a lot faster than you can do it manually. There's also going to be fewer mistakes because once you've automated that process, hopefully you've automated it the right way. So it's not going to have typos or accidentally delete things and stuff that you might accidentally do yourself if you're performing that task. So it's very accurate, and it allows you to generate pretty consistent results, which for companies can result in like higher quality products because they don't have to worry about making as many mistakes. So I mentioned there's three main automation technologies in OS X. So first I just want to mention AppleScript because everybody has heard of AppleScript, but probably not that many people know actually what it is. So AppleScript it's a scripting language, which is kind of like a programming language. And it's built into OS X. It's been around since System 7.1, I believe. And it's used to automate and control existing applications on your Mac if they support it. And it's generally used to automate time-consuming things or repetitive things that you would do. Now, some of the benefits of AppleScript over other programming languages are that it's fairly easy to learn. It has a very English-like syntax or language. So if you look at this line here, tell the application finder to make new folder at the desktop. Pretty much anybody can understand what that's going to do. And you don't have to be a programming expert to understand it. So if you ever see an AppleScript and you open it, the odds are good that you might be able to make it through the script and kind of figure out what it's going to do just by looking at the code, because a lot of the code looks like this. And it doesn't always, but a lot of the time it does. So there's a lot of benefits to using AppleScript. First off, you can expand your application features. So I mentioned that mail can trigger rules when emails arrive. Well, Apple gives you rules to do certain things, like move messages to a folder or change the color of a message or things like that. But you might need to do more advanced stuff. And so mail allows you to actually trigger an AppleScript from a rule too. So you could have an AppleScript that runs when a new email arrives and it does something with that message. Maybe it saves it to a folder or it extracts some information from it and does something with it. AppleScripts can also be built with interfaces so they look and feel just like any other OS X application. So you can have windows and buttons and progress bars and things like that. And that gets a lot more difficult to write a script like that, but it can be done. And AppleScript you can automate very simple things with AppleScript, like just creating a folder or deleting something, or you can create really complex processes like building a catalog in InDesign of images and data from a database or something like that. And so that's the kind of stuff that I do a lot for my clients. So some of the things that AppleScript can do are batch processing, so maybe inserting images and captions into a Word document for a book. Database publishing, so I mentioned building a catalog. Image manipulation, so maybe scaling 100 or 1,000 images and converting them from one format to another. File and folder maintenance, and a lot of other stuff too. With AppleScript, there's a couple things to keep in mind. One thing is that applications may not always support AppleScript. A lot of applications do, but not all applications do. And there's actually been some controversy lately because Apple released new versions of the iWork applications, so Pages and Numbers and Keynote. And as part of that upgrade, they removed a lot of the AppleScript support in the applications. So I actually wrote a whole article for Macworld on my take on that. And really what it boils down to is I think that Apple they rewrote those applications from the ground up, and AppleScript didn't make the cut yet. Since I wrote the article, Apple's actually announced that they're starting to add AppleScript support back into the apps, and it will be coming back in future versions. So that kind of leads to the next bullet point, that the level of AppleScript support can vary from application to application. And I'm not going to get into all the details of AppleScript, but I just wanted to mention it and talk a little bit about it, because there's a lot of confusion sometimes about what's the difference between AppleScript and Automator. So let me move on to Automator now. So Automator is an application that was released with OS 10.4 Tiger, and it's been upgraded a few times since then, but it's received fairly minor updates. So the interface of Automator hasn't really changed much since, I'm going to say, probably Leopard 10.5. And it has a few little minor updates in Mavericks, but not a whole lot. So even if you're running an older operating system, as long as it's 10.4 or higher, you should have Automator, and you should be able to do some of the things that I'm going to talk to you guys about. So like AppleScript, Automator is used to automate time-consuming and repetitive things that you do on your Mac. But one main difference is that you don't have to write any code. So there's no scripting or programming necessary with Automator. In Automator, you have something called actions. And an action is like something that you want to do, maybe creating a folder or deleting a file or something like that. And so you put these actions together to form what's called a workflow. So I like to say it's like a recipe. The workflow is a recipe, and the actions are the ingredients. So you're putting these things together to form a process. Now, just like AppleScript and automation, there's a lot of benefits to Automator. But one of the big benefits is that it brings the power of multi-application automation to the user level. So anybody can do it. There's no need to learn a programming language or spend a lot of time writing code or having to be an expert. So there's a lot of stuff you can do with it with just a little bit of practice. And I will say that Automator is designed for anybody, but it does have a learning curve. So it's not super easy to use, but once you get the hang of it, it's not super difficult. Now, Automator has a lot of built-in actions to do things in Mail, in the Calendar app, in Contacts, in iPhoto, and a lot of other apps too. And then a lot of third-party apps also support Automator. So let's see, Pixelmator is a popular app on the Mac App Store, similar to Photoshop. It comes with Automator actions built in. Or another one that's popular is the Transmit app, or Fetch. These are FTP applications that people use to upload files to their websites and things like that. Both of those apps have built-in Automator actions. And then other companies or developers like myself have released Automator actions as well. So I've actually released a whole bunch of Automator action packs through the Mac App Store for things like Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign and FileMaker Pro and stuff like that. So there's a lot of third-party actions you can get too. Some come with apps that you already have or that you buy. Some actions are commercial, and then some are free. There's a lot of free ones out there too. So let's talk a little bit about what Automator is good for. So what can you do with it? Well, Automator is designed to do simple things. So it's great for doing simple tasks in one or more applications. So maybe you want to have an Automator workflow that just creates an email. That's a perfect thing for Automator to do. Or maybe you want an Automator workflow that gets some images from iPhoto and then puts them into an email. That's another great thing that Automator can do. So there you've tied two different applications together. Things that Automator can do are working with files and folders. So it can rename things, it can make folders, it can move files around. It can do things with music in your iTunes library. It can manipulate photos in iPhoto or get them out and do stuff with them. And you can also add some custom functions into your applications as well by creating services. Or there's a bunch of different kinds of Automator workflows you can build that let you trigger workflows in different ways. Things that Automator is not good for. Again, it's designed to do simple tasks. So it's not great for automating really complex things. So you probably, a company wouldn't use Automator to build a catalog automation tool. They might automate little tiny aspects of their workflow with it, but they're not going to build a whole complex process with it. Automator doesn't have the ability to analyze a situation and take different courses of actions, or different courses of action. So it can't, for example, say, let's see, here's a file on the desktop. If this is a JPEG, do this. If it's a PDF, do that. It can't do that because it doesn't have any logic built into it or decision making. Some other limitations. There are a limited number of actions available, and they're not always well maintained. So Automator has, I'm going to say, a few hundred actions probably that come with it, and then as you install more applications, you get more and more actions. But there's probably not an action for every single thing that you might want to do in an application. And by not always well maintained, I mean that there's a lot of times there are bugs in actions that just weren't caught when the actions were released. So people, Mavericks came out and people found bugs in various Automator actions for different things. So these are things that you have to kind of live with. Another issue is that Automator actions don't always fit together. And by that, I mean, when you build an Automator workflow, actions pass information from one to another. And so you might have an action that gets text from a text edit document, and then another action that puts text into an email. Well, if you don't have two actions that are compatible, that output text and input text, for example, or output files and input files, then you might not be able to get those actions to work together. Automator also doesn't have very, very good looping capabilities. So it has a loop action, which you can use to run a workflow over and over again, but it doesn't have the ability, at least not built in, to do things like looping through a bunch of files. It can process a bunch of files, but it can't loop through them one at a time. And that can cause some limitations or problems when you try to build certain kinds of workflows. It also doesn't have branching logic, which I already mentioned. And it's not always intuitive. So again, I mentioned that Automator is designed for anybody to build workflows, but it's a little bit confusing how to do that, how to get started. So it does take practice to figure that out. So let's take a look at Automator, and I'm just going to jump out of my slides and go to Automator. So Automator lives in your applications folder, just like your other apps. And when you open it, you get what's called a document, an Automator document, just like you would get in any other application. And in the document window, you have a couple different options. So the first thing that Automator does is it asks you what kind of workflow do you want to build, or what kind of document do you want to build, and it gives you all these different options. So you can build a workflow, which is just like a document that you can open in Automator, run it in Automator, or you can create an application. And an application works just like any other OS X application. So once you save it, you can double click on it to run the workflow, or you can even drag and drop files and folders onto it to process them. You can also create services, which I'll get to later if we have time. And you can create print plugins, which are plugins you can trigger from if you've ever printed a document in OS X, you have a little PDF button or PDF menu that you can save that document as a PDF. Well, if you save an Automator workflow as a print plugin, it shows up in that menu, and you can trigger the Automator workflow to process it. Folder actions are Automator workflows that are attached to a folder. So when you drag something into that folder, it starts to get processed. Calendar alarm Automator workflows are workflows that can be scheduled and run at a certain time. So maybe you want a workflow that runs every night while you're sleeping. You could create a calendar alarm workflow to do that. And then image capture plugin, which I don't think very many people use image capture, but it's another application in OS X that allows you to download photos from your camera. And if you wanted to have maybe something done to those photos as they're downloaded, you can actually create a plugin for that. So I'm just going to create a simple workflow here to just show you how Automator works. So I'm going to select workflow as my type. And so here I have my document, okay? And this is split into two different sections. Well, three kind of. But on the left side of the window, that's what I call the action library. So this is a list of all the actions that you have in Automator, that Automator sees on your hard drive. And when you open Automator, it looks for actions in various places. And it looks inside the applications on your machine, and it looks inside various folders of actions. And then these actions are organized by category. So you have calendar actions, you have contact actions, document actions, file and folder actions, and so on. If you go to the View menu, you can also choose to arrange your actions by application. So if you do that, then you can see, okay, here's all my calendar actions, here's all my aperture actions, here's all my fetch actions. And so I like to organize it that way usually, but it's up to you, however you want to, whichever makes most sense to you. You can also search for an action. So suppose I wanted to create a new folder. I can type in folder, or I could type in new folder to narrow it down a little bit more. And so searching is really the quickest way to find the action that you want. So a lot of times whenever I want to build a workflow, I very rarely even click through the different categories. I'll just start typing what I'm searching for. And it doesn't just search the action names, it also searches metadata in the actions. So it might search keywords and things like that. So even if you're not sure what the action's named, you can still try to search for it. So when you select an action in the action library, you get a description here that tells you a little bit about that action. And by a little bit, I mean a very little bit usually. Most actions don't have a whole lot of documentation, unfortunately. So in this case, it doesn't. This is just a new folder. This action creates a new folder with a specified name. It doesn't really need a lot of documentation. But some actions can be kind of complicated, and they may or may not have detailed information about what they do there. So we have a description, and then we also have some other information. This action accepts input. So it will take files and folders from another action, and that's optional. It doesn't have to receive them, but if it does, so if files are passed to this action, then they'll be copied into the new folder. So this action can create a folder, but it can also copy things into it as it creates the folder. And then the result of this action is files and folders. So if I were to build a workflow, I would want to find, and I wanted to do something with the result of this action, I'd need to find another action that takes files and folders as its input. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, so once I find an action that does what I need, I can select it and just drag it over to this workflow area. And then I get a little settings window for the action. So here for the new folder action, I can specify a name. So I'll call it my folder. And I can choose where I want that folder to show up. So I'll just let it show up on the desktop. And then if I want to test this, I can click run. And you can see that a folder called my folder shows up on the desktop. Now if I go back in Automator and I click the results area, you can also see the results of what that action did. So this is a good way to troubleshoot a workflow, is to go into Automator and check the results of each action to make sure that the result is what you're expecting. I also have some other things down here. Options. I can choose to ignore the action's input. So this action, again, will take files and folders as input. And if files and folders are passed to the action, then they're copied into the new folder. Well, maybe I don't want it to do that. Maybe I just want it to make a folder without copying anything into it. So in that case, I can tell it to ignore its input, and now it will just create the folder. So if I had another action before this that output files, they would not get copied into the folder if I have that option selected. I can also choose to show this action when the workflow runs. So I might not always want to call it my folder, or I might not always want to save it to the desktop. Maybe I want to change that each time I run the workflow. So if I have that selected and I run this again, now it displays the actions window when the workflow runs, and I can type something else. So I'll say my other folder. Okay, and I can also view the actions description again here. So that's how you build a simple workflow at a very basic level. So let's look at how actions work together. So suppose I built this folder, and then I wanted to add the date to the folder. So I'm just going to change the name of this folder back to my folder. And suppose I want to have current date at the beginning of the folder name. Well, there's no option to do that in the new folder action. There is a new dated folder action, which might do what I need, but I'm just going to try to work with this action. So I'm going to look for an action called rename. And there's a rename finder items action. And if I drag that after new folder, Automator gives me a message here. And it does this occasionally with some actions. It's telling me that this action is going to change the names of the finder items passed to it. And it wants to know if I want to insert a copy finder items action first, to copy basically to back up the things that are passed to this action so that I preserve my originals. Well, I'm just creating a new folder. I'm not working with anything that's super important. So I'm going to say, don't add that extra copy finder items action. Okay, so now I have an action, rename finder items. And if you look closely, you can see that this action links up to the previous action. This tells me that these actions are compatible. If there's no little arrow pointing between the actions, then the actions aren't compatible and they're not going to get, the information isn't going to flow from one action to the next. But here they're compatible, so everything matches up. And if I look at the rename finder items actions description, I can see that its input is files and folders. So that tells me that it's going to be compatible. And then I have all different options for how I rename these finder items. So I can add text or change the case or make file or folder names sequential. So I want to add the date or time. So I'm going to add the date created, or actually I'll say the current date, which is basically the date created anyway. I'm going to add it before the name, and you can see there's a little preview here that shows me what the new name's going to look like. I'm going to use dashes to separate the name from the date, and I'm going to say I want it in year, month, day format, and I'm going to use dashes to separate the year, month, day, and leading zeros, which aren't really important here because we have 2 digits in the month and the day. So if I run this workflow now, let me just disable that, show when the workflow runs. So if I run that, you can see it created, well, it actually didn't create the My Folder because that folder already exists on my desktop, but it would have, and then it named it with the current date. So now I've created a 2-step workflow that I could run anytime I want to create a dated folder. Okay, so let's look at something else that Automator can do besides creating folders. So I'm going to close that, and I'm just going to delete those folders from my desktop and go back into Automator. So suppose I want to, maybe I have a bunch of photos that I email out on a regular basis. Like maybe I send my family a whole bunch of photos, and I do it each week or each month. Or maybe I want to send them to a client. But I don't want to send them my actual high-res photos. And I don't actually want them to have my actual photos. I just want to send them like a PDF contact sheet of my photos. So I can use Automator to create a PDF contact sheet and attach it to an email. So I'm going to create a new workflow, and I'm going to search for the words ask for, and there's an action called ask for finder items. There's also an ask for photos action, which would be great. Basically what this one does is it asks for photos in your iPhoto library, or your Aperture library. I want to actually choose some photos on my desktop, so I'm going to insert the ask for finder items action, but you could use ask for photos instead. So I'm going to change the prompt to say, choose some images, and And then I'm going to search for PDF. And if I look through the list of actions here, there's an action called New PDF Contact Sheet. So I'm going to drag that to the workflow. And again, you can see that the actions link up. So here I have, let's see, I'll just call this Contact Sheet, and I'll have it create on the desktop with letter size and 3 photos, or 3 columns of photos. And then now I want to attach that contact sheet to an email. So I'm going to type in mail message, and there's an action called new mail message. And if I look at this action's description, this action accepts files and folders or text. So if files are passed to it as input, then those files they get attached to the new email message. So I'm going to drag that to my workflow area. And I can enter whatever information I want, such as who it's going to go to. Maybe it's going to go to the same person every time. Or I can enter a subject, so I'll say contact sheet. And I'll enter a message. Here are my latest and greatest photos. And so now if I run this, it asks me to choose some images. So I have a folder with some example images on my desktop. So I'm just going to select those. Oh, actually, I'm going to cancel this. One thing I forgot to do is I want to allow myself to choose multiple images. So I'm going to select this Allow Multiple checkbox. And let me run that again. Okay, so I'm going to choose a bunch of images. And you can see Automator starts making a PDF. And then it creates a new email with the PDF attached, which apparently has no images in it for some reason. Let me see here. So there may be a bug in Automator with this action. So I don't know if I've run this action in Mavericks. Okay. Well, I'm not sure why that didn't work, but I'm going to improvise. So instead of creating a PDF contact sheet, maybe I will just I'll just attach the images to an email. So I just deleted the new contact sheet action, and now the images themselves are going to get passed to the new mail message action. So if I run this, I will select my images, and now you can see the images get attached. So it's not exactly what I was looking for, but at least it demonstrated how to get the images into the email. So I'll have to look into why that PDF didn't include the images. It could be a bug. Okay. So let's look at an application. So everything I've created so far has been a workflow that I've run within Automator. But I mentioned that you can also create applications. So I'm going to close that workflow, and I'm going to create another workflow. And this time I'm going to choose to create an application workflow. And when I do that, the top of the workflow says that this application receives files and folders as input. So basically, once I save this, if I drag a file onto it, that file is going to get passed into the action as input. So when I build my workflow, I want to have an action at the top of the workflow that takes files and folders as input. So what I'm going to do is, suppose I want to convert these images to black and white. There's an Automator action to do that. So anytime I drag an image onto this workflow, I want to get converted to black and white. So I'm going to start by creating a new folder. So I'm going to search for a new folder again, and I'm going to drag that to the workflow, and you can see it links up to the top here, so you can see that it's compatible. And I'm going to name the folder Converted Images, and I'll just have it get created on the desktop. So remember, this action copies images into the new folder. So it's going to leave my original wherever it is, and it's going to copy the dropped image into the new folder that it creates. And now what I want to do is I want to get any images that have been copied into this folder. So if I search for folder, there's an action called Get Folder Contents. So the output of the new folder action is not what's been copied into it, it's the folder itself. So now what I want to do is, after the stuff's been copied into it, I want to get a list of those files. So I'm going to use the get folder contents action to do that. And now, let's see. Now I want to convert those images to black and white. So I'm going to search for filter. And this is a little bit confusing, but there's an action called apply quartz composition filter to image files. It's a nice short name for an action. So I'm going to drag this to my workflow. And this action is letting me know that it's going to modify my images. Now, I've already copied the images. So it's suggesting that I copy them to an output folder. It's suggesting that I copy them to another folder before I modify them. Well, I've already done that. So I'm going to say, don't add a copy finder items action before this action. Now, I could also, if these alerts get really annoying, I could just say, don't show me this again. Okay. So, now, this action has a whole bunch of options here, but one of them is black and white. And so there's all different filters you can apply here. Kind of things you might do with Photoshop or iPhoto or things like that. So I just want to convert them to black and white. All right, so I'm going to save my workflow, and I'm going to save it as an application, and I'll call it convert images to black and white. And I'll just save it to my desktop. And you can see the file format set to application. And I'll leave it open, but I'll just hide it. Okay, so here's my application. And now if I go to my sample images, and I drag these on top of the workflow, you can see that the workflow gets highlighted, so it's basically saying it's going to accept those. And so if I drop them, the workflow starts to run. And I have a converted images folder gets created, the files get copied into it, and they get converted to black and white. Not sure what that line is, but interesting. I don't think that was in the images, but in any case, so they got converted to black and white. So I actually used a similar workflow to this when I wrote my book for PeachPit. So PeachPit, they required me to save screenshots. So I had a ton of screenshots outlining how to do different things in Automator. And so I might have had a chapter with 100 screenshots. And so if I take those screenshots in OS 10, they all appeared as color PNG files. And PeachPit wanted them all as black and white TIFF files. And I think they maybe also had to be sized a certain amount. So I just created an Automator workflow to do this. And anytime I finished a chapter, I would just take all images for that chapter, all my screenshots, and just drag them onto this workflow. And the Automator workflow would automatically convert them to black and white and change the file type to TIFF. And I maybe did a little bit of scaling. And it would rename them all as well to have like a figure number or something. So that saved me a lot of time that I would have had to spend doing this stuff manually. Okay, so those are a few simple workflows with Automator. And next I want to move on and talk a little bit about services because I don't have a whole lot of time. So I do want to touch on that as well. Okay, so services. What are services? Services are they're automation options or automation tasks that you can trigger throughout OS 10. And you may have noticed if you're in an application that in the application menu, there's a services menu. And that services menu might have different tasks that you can trigger, like send this document to mail or send this photo to messages, things like that. Services also appear in contextual menus throughout the operating system. So if you go in text edit and you select a bunch of text and then you right click on it, you'll get a little menu. And in that menu, there's services listed there too at the bottom. And so basically the services are ways for applications to share functionality with other applications throughout the operating system. So Evernote, for example, if you install Evernote, you'll start to see Evernote services appearing in these menus that let you, put files in Evernote or copy text right to Evernote. And lots of applications do this kind of thing. Mail does it, Safari does it, and a lot of third-party applications as well. So Automator allows you to create services. So you can create your own plugins for the services menu. And so we're going to take a look at how you do that. Okay, so back to Automator. So when you create your workflow, one of the options is to create a service. So if I choose that, the top here, it allows me to set some options for this. So I can choose to allow this service to process text in a specific application or in any application, or I can choose to process files and folders, or documents or image files, or all different kinds of things. So when you build a service, you generally are building it to process something. So maybe you want to get text and do something with it in an application. Maybe you want to create a service that gets some text and then converts it to an image file and then saves it to your desktop or puts it in an email. So you can create a service that does that. Just 1 second, I just want to pull up my notes. Okay, so all right, so I created a workflow a few minutes ago that created a dated folder on my desktop. And that's great for a new folder, but suppose I want to add a date to a folder that already exists. Like maybe I want to add a date to this example images folder or something like that. And I do this a lot myself. I always add the date to folder names, like at the beginning, so that I can sort them when I'm creating stuff for clients or whatever. So I can create a service to help me do this, so I don't have to keep typing the date manually. Half the time I don't even know what the date is. So I'm going to create a service that accepts files and folders. It receives selected files and folders in the Finder. And now I can just search for that rename action and drag it to the workflow. And again, Automator's letting me know, hey, this is going to modify your files. No, I do not want to insert a copy Finder items action. And so here I can choose that I want to add the current date before the name. And I'm just going to configure a bunch of these fairly quickly because I've already done this for the other workflow. And then I'm going to save my workflow and we'll call it add date to file or folder. Okay? So now Automator puts that where it needs to go. I don't need to worry about where to install that. Automator installs it for me into the right location. But now if I go in the Finder and I hold down the control key, or I right click with my mouse on a folder, you can see I have this services menu down here. And there's all these different things that appear here. So I mentioned there's some things with Evernote and Text Wrangler. And here is my Automator workflow, add date to file or folder. And if I select this, it runs the workflow and it passes the folder that I had selected as input to the workflow. And so that's the folder that gets renamed. And I can now trigger that on any file or folder. So I'm going to say add date to it again. And so now I very quickly can now add a date anytime I want to throughout OS 10. Now I could do the same thing for images, for example. So let me create a new workflow, and I'm going to create a service again. And let's suppose I want to create a workflow that scales a bunch of images. So this time I'm going to choose that this workflow receives selected image files in the Finder. And if I search for scale, there's an action called scale images, and I can drag that to the workflow. And so now in this case, I'm going to allow Automator to insert a copy Finder items action first, because I do want to back up my files before I process them. So this time I'm going to say add. Okay, so it inserted 2 actions. And I can choose where I want to create these. I'm going to create them in a folder. Let's see, I'll create it on the desktop called Scaled Images. And I'm going to say that I want to scale my images by 50%. And I'll save this workflow as Scale Images to 50% and save it. So again, Automator puts it where it needs to go. And if I come out to the Finder and I right-click on my on a folder and I go down to Services, you can see the workflow doesn't show up because it's set to only show up when I have selected image files. So let me go into my let's see, in my example images folder, and here I've got some images. So I'm just going to select a few of those, and I'm going to right-click and go down to Services, and now I have my Automator workflow that shows up because it knows, it's smart enough to know that it should only show up when I have image files selected in the Finder. So if I run that, and I look in my Scaled Images folder, you can see that those images that I had selected have been copied into there, and they've been scaled by 50%. So very quickly I've created, without even needing something like Photoshop, a very simple image processor that can scale images for me. And you know, doing it for one image with Preview or Photoshop may not be a problem, but if you've got tons of images that you want to do this to, it can really save you a lot of time. So I'm going to create one last workflow here to demonstrate services. So here I have some text. And suppose I want to save this text as an image. Well, Automator actually has an action that allows you to do that. So I'm going to create a service. And this time I'm going to say that this service receives text in any application. And let's see here, text, image. I'm just going to search for the keywords text and image. And there's an action called create banner image from text. So I'm just going to drag that to the workflow. And I can, there's various options here. I'm just going to allow it to save the image to the desktop, to use the text input as the image name. And I'm going to set it to use the same style as the text that it gets. And I'm going to save this as convert to image. We'll call it convert text to image, so I actually know what it's going to do. Now if I go to text edit here, and I select this text and right-click on it, you can see that my workflow shows up, convert text to image. And if I select it, it should create an image file on my desktop, which apparently did not apply the formatting, but it did create an image, so that's good. So that may be another bug with Automator in Mavericks. Anyway, you get the point though. So you can create workflows that process selected text. And as you can see, there's a lot of bugs in various actions. So that is, I think, probably about all the time we have for me to show you some stuff. So let me just mention a few resources if you want to learn more about Automator. So first of all, macOS 10 or macOSXautomation.com is a very good resource for learning about Automator. First of all, you can find information there, but you can also find a lot of example workflows and some actions, and there's videos on there, and there's all kinds of information. And it is an unofficial website provided by someone at Apple who shall remain nameless, but is not affiliated by Apple. As you can see by the banner, this website is not hosted by Apple Inc. MacScripter.net is a website mainly for AppleScript people. Basically, it's an online forum where you can go post questions and get answers to how to do things. But they do have an Automator forum where you can post questions about Automator as well. I have a tips section of my website where I have a lot of videos, many of which you can view online for free through PeachPit or iTunes. I have a lot of articles that I've written on Automator and AppleScript and other things. And a lot of that stuff is available for free viewing in my tips section. So I'd encourage you to check that out as well. Also, Apple has a mailing list, a whole huge set of mailing lists you can subscribe to. If you really, really want to get into Automator or AppleScript or something like that, and you want to ask questions but you don't want to do it on the web, you can actually do it through email. So lists.apple.com, and you'll find this huge list of mailing lists you can subscribe to. My book for PeachPit is Automator for Mac OS 10 Visual Quick Start Guide. It was written for Snow Leopard, but as I mentioned, not a whole lot has changed in Automator since Snow Leopard, so pretty much almost everything should still be relevant. And they do have, if you're not already a member, PeachPit has a nice user group program where you can get books to give out as giveaways for your group, or you can do reviews of them for your newsletter or whatever. So if you're not a member and you want information, I can point you to the right person for that. AppleScript 123 is a book, if you want to learn about AppleScript. This is written by Sal Segoyden, who's the AppleScript and Automation product manager at Apple. So I can't really think of anyone better to read their book than Sal. My podcast, Mac Automation Made Simple. Again, you can find these in the tip section of my website, but they're also available in iTunes. I haven't done any in a while, but there are a lot. I think there are about 30 or so videos on how to do things in Automator and with AppleScript, all geared toward beginners. And of course, you're welcome to email me or message me on Twitter if you have questions or you get stuck on something. I'm always happy to try to help people out. So that is all that I have for you guys. Does anybody have any questions? I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Any questions? Bob? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
In Photoshop Bridge, I'm looking at colored pictures. I want to have a quick look, how would they look in black and white? Where do I go? Do I go to Automator, or is there some other way to get that quickly done? In a way that's temporary and I can go back.
I would have to look at Bridge. I believe Bridge has some automation features that allow you to generate contact sheets and possibly preview images in black and white or other. I would have to look at it and how to do that. But you could also create an Automator workflow to copy files to a folder and then convert them to black and white, just like I demonstrated. And if you decide you want to try that, you're welcome to email me and I can send you an example workflow to show you how to do it.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Marilyn.
My question is, you mentioned that when you did the services workflow, it automatically knew where to save it. Where do you save, how do you save the other workflow types of projects? Do you tell them where to be saved, or do they go someplace special?
If you create an Automator document or an application, you can save them wherever you want, just like any other document. So if you save an Automator document, you can put it in your documents folder or on your desktop or anywhere. If you create an Automator application, you can also put that anywhere, but you can also put it in your applications folder. You could drag it to your doc. So you can put it anywhere that you want. Now, if you create the other types of workflows, such as a service or a folder action or some of the ones that I didn't have time to get to, those get installed into specific places in your operating system, and those are in your user library folder. And Automator handles installing those for you, so you don't really need to know where they go unless you want to maybe delete them or something. And I actually wrote an article for the unofficial Apple weblog that explains like what all these folders are and where they put things. things. But as far as general Automator stuff, applications and documents can really be put anywhere.
So, if it were, would it normally be, if it was,
Wait a
okay.
minute.
If it was an automatic,
Can you hear us?
yeah, if it was
hear
automatically done like services, would it be in the right-click area? If it was automatically placed somewhere, would it be always?
I'm not getting audio from you.
Okay. If it was automatically placed somewhere, would it be in the right-click menu?
Can you repeat that?
If it was automatically placed somewhere, like in services, would it always be in the right-click menu?
If you create an Automator service, then yes, it always appears in the right-click menu. Or let me just hide this. If I go, so here in Keynote, I'm in Keynote, but you can see there's a services menu. So it could appear here as well. So there's services always appear in one of the services menus, and there's really two locations for that. One is in the right-click menu, or one is in the application menu. But the files themselves, here I'll show you. The files themselves are actually stored into. Hold on one second. So if I go to the Go menu and I hold down the Option key, I can say Go to my library, and inside of here, there's a folder called Services. And that's where they go. So Automator puts them there for me. But for running them, I run them from those menus. So I don't really need to go to this folder ever unless I want to delete if I wanted to delete these or something.
Another question. You can hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
You said that the new iWork does not have script, but the previous version is fully scriptable, Automator?
So when I was talking about that, I was talking mainly about AppleScript. So hold on, let me pull up Automator here. So first of all, Automator does not have any actions for pages or numbers. It does have actions for Keynote. So there's things you can do in Keynote, but not in pages and numbers. And Automator never had support for pages and numbers, so that's nothing new. As far as the AppleScript support goes, because a lot of people use AppleScript to automate things too, in addition to Automator. Pages, numbers, and Keynote all had some level of AppleScript support. They weren't necessarily fully scriptable. Like maybe you couldn't automate every single thing that you do manually, but you could automate a lot of things. And in the new version of those, Apple did away with the majority of AppleScript support. So numbers has absolutely no AppleScript support. Pages has only one AppleScript command, and Keynote has fewer AppleScript commands than it had before. But since the time of the release, Apple has posted an announcement saying that they're starting to reinstate AppleScript support in those apps, and as well as other features too. There's a lot of other features that didn't make the cut too. And that within 6 months, they said that you would start seeing it return. So I don't know what that means for Automator yet, whether they'll add Automator actions or not, but that's the state of it right now.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me, Ted?
No.
1 second. Okay, you can hear him now, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Because for those of us who use the Microsoft Office applications, does Automator have any interface with any of those?
Yes. So Microsoft Office, beginning with Office 2008, came with about 90 Automator actions for Excel, Outlook, PowerPoint, and Word, or Entourage before Outlook came out. Now, I'm not sure how they market this now. It used to be that because they've changed the different Office packages. So it used to be that these actions only were given out if you bought like the Office Business Edition. And I'm not sure whether they're included in like the Home and Student Edition now. But there are Automator actions for Microsoft Office. Actually, Microsoft hired me to write them. So I actually wrote all these actions that come with Office. But I'm not 100% sure which versions of Office they come with. They may come with all versions, or they may just come with the Business Edition.
Any other questions? Thank you very, very much.